a small, worn-out house on the edge of town, the Garcia family struggled to survive. Life had been difficult for them, and it seemed like every year brought more challenges than the last. The family had 5 members: Miguel, the father, Rosa, the mother, and their 3 children: Lucas, age 16, Sofia, age 12, and little Mateo, only 6 years old. Once, Miguel had been a promising mechanic, known for his skill with engines, and Rosa had dreamed of becoming a teacher, but a series of misfortunes left them trapped in a cycle of poverty that they couldn't seem to escape. Miguel's troubles began when the factory he worked at laid him off, and with no steady job, he took on odd jobs wherever he could find them, often underpaid or for people who wouldn't always keep their promises. He'd come home late, exhausted and defeated, unable to look his children in the eye. Rosa, once bright and hopeful, had to put her dreams on hold, taking whatever part-time work she could while caring for their children. She worked at a diner during the day, but the hours were long and the pay barely covered their rent and the essentials. The children felt the strain, each in their own way. Lucas was once a cheerful, ambitious boy, but he'd started spending more time alone, his face hardening with each passing day. He'd been thinking about quitting school to find work, wanting to help his family, though Rosa begged him to stay. "If you leave school, you'll end up like us," she would say, her voice heavy with fear. Lucas knew his mother was right, but seeing his siblings go hungry at times made it hard to ignore the idea. Sophia, the middle child, was sensitive and bright, but she struggled under the weight of the family's troubles. She'd overheard Miguel and Rosa talking late at night about bills they couldn't pay, and she began to feel guilty every time she needed school supplies or new clothes. She became quieter at school, her grades slipping, and her teachers noticed her withdrawing, but they couldn't reach her in any way that truly helped. Then there was Mateo, the youngest, who didn't understand why his world was different from others. He would ask Rosa why they didn't have enough food or why his shoes had holes in them, and she would force a smile, telling him that things would be better soon. But Rosa knew, deep down, that she was just trying to keep her children's hope alive. One evening, the family sat down to dinner. It was a simple meal, rice and beans, but Rosa had managed to save a little extra money to buy a few slices of bread as a treat. They ate in silence, but each of them was thinking of the days when they could afford small joys, like a piece of meat or a bowl of fruit. As they ate, Miguel shared the news that he'd found a job working in a factory an hour away. The hours would be long, and the pay wasn't much, but it was something. "I'll make it work," he said, a faint hope in his voice, though he knew the family wouldn't see him as often. The kid smiled weakly, grateful for any hint of relief, but it was Rosa who felt the weight of his sacrifice most deeply. She knew he was willing to push himself to exhaustion for them, but it worried her that he was breaking himself bit by bit. Months went by, and Miguel's job did help. They managed to pay off a few debts, and for a brief moment, the weight on their shoulders seemed lighter. But as winter approached, Miguel began to struggle with his health. The long hours and the exposure to the elements wore him down, and soon he was too sick to work. Rosa was devastated. She tried to find more hours at the diner, but with Miguel bedridden, she couldn't leave the children alone for long. Lucas decided he'd had enough of watching his family suffer. He dropped out of school and found a job as a dishwasher in a local restaurant, working late into the night and sleeping only a few hours before heading home. Rosa begged him to reconsider, her heart breaking at the sight of her son sacrificing his future. But Lucas was determined to help, and his sense of duty only grew stronger. With Lucas working and Rosa putting in every hour she could at the diner, the family managed to keep a roof over their heads, but it wasn't enough to lift them out of poverty. Sophia, once a bright girl with big dreams, began to believe that she too would have to give up on her ambitions. She stopped talking about the future, stopped sharing her dreams with her mother. Mateo, now 7, had lost the innocent sparkle in his eyes. He no longer asked why his family was different because he'd started to understand the answer. Years went by and each of them continued to work and struggle. Miguel's health improved slightly, but he was never the same. He did what he could around the house, helping the children with their studies and keeping their spirits up in small ways. But he often sat quietly, staring out the window, haunted by his inability to provide for them the way he'd once promised. For Rosa, watching her children's innocence slip away was the hardest part. She couldn't bear the thought that their dreams were fading, that they were learning to expect so little from life. She held on to hope, finding strength in her love for them, and every now and then, she would gather the family close and tell them stories about better days, about a future where things would be different. One cold winter night, they all sat around a small heater, wrapped in blankets, and sharing stories to keep warm. Lucas talked about his dreams of becoming a mechanic like his father, and for the first time in years, Miguel's face lit up with pride. Sofia shared her love of drawing, which she'd secretly been practicing in a sketchbook she'd found. Even Mateo joined in, talking about his dream of one day living in a house with warm water and a garden full of flowers. In that small, broken home, the Garcia family held on to each other, finding strength in their shared love, even as poverty continued to press down on them. And though their struggles were far from over, in those moments together, they found the courage to keep dreaming. They knew that life might always be a fight, but with each other, they had a reason to keep going, to work, to sacrifice, and to hope that one day, the world might offer them a better tomorrow.